must keep her through cons and a wishing well. Prayed for a love to call his own, a love to break the spell.
Welcome to the Red Pill Buddhas podcast for red-pilled Buddhas everywhere. Revolutionary, free-thinking spiritual people who've woken up from the mainstream narrative on various levels, and I interview some of the most fascinating ones here. Please also visit thehumanunleashed.com for hundreds of hours of our video content on all areas of health, lifestyle, and much more, and the redpillrevolution.com for our 5-star reviewed book and subsequent publications in the Red Pill series as they come out. Right, welcome everybody again to the latest Red Pill Buddhas episode. And I've invited Jeremy along, Dr. Jeremy Ayers, to help me out with this one, because I know he's been very interested in Andrew's case and his progress and whatever. So he's going to help me if I sort of, space out or anything. And I've been really wanting to get Andrew on for ages. This is Andrew Scarborough. He's a great friend of mine. I first met him back in 2015 when Jack Cruz asked me to help him out with a talk at the London Biohacking Summit, I think it was called. And Andrew was there, and I was already kind of aware of his story, but it's been fascinating over the years. And Andrew is 10 years out from a glioblastoma diagnosis.
It was an anaplastic astrocytoma.
There we go.
But it had a lot of the unfavorable characteristics.
I know, and I want to ask you about that. I want to ask you about the full story, but it's amazing. I mean, I saw Andrew a couple of weeks ago and had dinner with him, and I can vouch that he is fit and well, and now involved in his own cancer metabolism research that we want to get into. And I mean, look at Andrew, he looks early 20s. This guy's coming up to 40, for goodness sake.
Don't say that.
I had no idea. I had no idea that you weren't sort of in the 20s. But anyway, Andrew, welcome. And first of all, please tell us what happened, and tell us this amazing story at the beginning of what happened to you, because you've been through a hell of a lot, and you're lucky to be here, and not so lucky, but from your own wisdom, really. So what happened?
Yeah, so I was diagnosed with an anaplastic astrocytoma brain tumor. That's the short version. And then I did my own thing to come to where I am now. But I would say leading up to that diagnosis was a very confusing time. I was suffering from quite debilitating migraines, working as a personal trainer at the time. And they just got worse and worse. And I went to my GP. My GP told me I was suffering from stress and I just needed to take a break and have some aspirin, and it would be okay. From then I knew something was wrong. So I decided to quit my job and do a master's in nutritional therapy at the University of Westminster, partly because I wanted to try and figure out what was wrong with me, because I thought maybe it's something I'm doing, even though I believed that my diet and lifestyle at the time was as perfect as it could be. I was following the guidelines as well as you could. I'd say I was on a pescatarian diet. That would be the closest description. And I was following what's called like a rainbow style diet, just getting lots of colors in and not eating that much red meat and not having too much fat. Did have some fat in my diet, but not from the sources I do now. And to cut a long story short, I then, after a few months of these debilitating migraines, I developed a very, very strong crushing feeling in my head. And this was very sudden in its kind of action on me, how it was affecting me. And all of a sudden when I was boarding a very busy train, this pain just became unbearable, and I felt like I'm going to die on this train. And I then suffered what I now know as being called a thunderclap headache, which is like the worst headache you could ever feel, worst pain you could ever imagine. And that's kind of like being hit on the side of the head with a hammer, just really hard. And then I woke up very dazed and confused on the other side of the train with what I now know was a doctor who was standing over me, and I was just very confused. And I'd suffered quite bad injuries. I dislocated my shoulder, lots of bruising. My tongue looked like it'd gone through a blender, and I was still very confused at that stage. And just also very, I was very confused because I thought that I was going to die, and then I woke up on the other side. So when you have that kind of experience, it really shakes you. And I was shaken quite literally because I had a grand mal seizure as well. I continued to have grand mal seizures, slipping in and out of consciousness. I then went to hospital, and I was given large doses of intravenous anti-epileptic drugs to try and control the seizures. I'd lost my speech, so I wasn't really able to communicate anything or understand anything. Suddenly surrounded by my family. And I had a CT scan, and I was then diagnosed with what they thought was a cavernous hemangioma from a brain hemorrhage. So the thunderclap headache was caused by this brain hemorrhage that I'd had. And it was just so vascular, and there was so much blood that they couldn't really determine what they were actually looking at. So they just thought, cavernous hemangioma, which is an abnormal cluster of blood vessels in the brain. And it took up so much space at that time that they were just, it was a lot of guessing, but very overconfident guessing. So I had a number of investigations, different misdiagnoses as well. At one point, they said it was an arteriovenous malformation, which is even more serious than a cavernous hemangioma. That can be imminently life-threatening if it's not dealt with. And it's very difficult to treat with surgery. So after lots of discussion, by the way, a cavernous hemangioma isn't that serious. It can be, but it mainly tends to, depending on where it is in the brain, just cause you to have these kind of seizures just occasionally. It's kind of like having a volcano in the brain that erupts occasionally and causes a nuisance. So that's what they thought it was for quite a while. I eventually had, after having horrific grand mal seizures consistently, despite being on all of this medication, I eventually had, so this was about a week later, an operation to remove this mass in my head. Following the operation to remove as much as they could of this mass, I received a phone call on a Friday evening while I was recovering to say that they'd made a mistake, and it was actually a highly malignant terminal and incurable brain tumor. So to hear that over the phone on a Friday evening doesn't really give you much time to take in what you're being told, but the words terminal and incurable were just stuck with me over the weekend. And so I was told that, and then I was told we've booked an appointment for you on Tuesday to have a discussion on having radiotherapy and chemotherapy. And it was kind of like it wasn't a choice. This is what's going to happen. And so I had that appointment, still being very confused and angry about how I was misdiagnosed. And I was even told that it's probable that I would have benefited more, or it would have been more appropriate for me to have had an awake craniotomy rather than being asleep, because they could have removed more. But and also because it was touched the motor strip area of my brain, so they couldn't remove all of the disease. So yeah, I was quite angry in that initial consultation, and I was asking lots of questions. So I was seen as a bit of a nuisance already. I saw a radiation oncologist. So your options are quite limited when you're seeing a radiation oncologist, because the clue's in the name. They're not going to say, oh, we don't think you should have radiation. Yeah, clues in the title. That's what they work for. And so, yeah, I was frightened into thinking this is going to potentially extend my life by a few months. So I initially went ahead with it. And then when I learned more about my particular type of tumor and that it wasn't likely to be chemosensitive, I decided to stop my treatment against the wishes of my oncologist at the time. And yeah, I was left on my own really, and I was having all these horrific seizures and other symptoms that were just making my life hell, and side effects of the anti-epileptic drugs. I'd actually purposely put myself on sodium valproate, which has it can act as an HDAC inhibitor, so it can actually be used as a repurposed drug for high-grade gliomas, which is what I had. And a glioma, I'd say it affects cells that are kind of like the glue-like cells in the brain. The word glial comes from, the word glue is derived from the word glia, which means glue, holds things together in the brain. But when you have a tumor there that they're deriving from those cells, it's pretty problematic because it can be extremely invasive and can grow very quickly if you let it. And so, where am I now?
Just one quick thing there, Andrew. I was talking to Anthony Chaffee, the carnivore neurosurgeon or whatever, on the podcast recently. And he said that quite often when you take these crazy tumors out, they just come back in the other side of the brain anyway. Especially
if you have radiation.
Yeah.
You get secondary tumors which are caused by the radiation.
Of course. Yeah.
So yeah, that's one of the reasons I decided to stop all my treatment and thinking. I'd wish I'd done it earlier, but I was thankful to do it when I did, at least, because I don't think the course would have been very good for me, especially as I had my tumor was IDH1 wild type, which is supposed to be a horrible characteristic to have, because it confers poorer prognosis and treatment resistance. And I also had unmethylated MGMT. And MGMT is a DNA repair protein, which, if it's unmethylated, again, it's supposed to predict poor prognosis and treatment resistance. And they have a whole new classification of brain tumors now. So if I reclassified my tumor, it would be even worse and not better. So with the current guidelines, last year it was the World Health Organization changed the classification for these kind of brain tumors that have these mutations and chromosomal deletions, which mine had. And so I just after my diagnosis, I referred to something I'd learned on my master's in nutritional therapy, which I was doing before the brain hemorrhage happened. It was actually really close to the point in which I'd had it. So it's quite strange quite funny how I'd learned about ketogenic diets and the potential for treating brain tumors. And this was around the same time that Thomas Seyfried's book, Cancer as a Metabolic Disease, came out. And so I was very fortunate to discover that. And then from my studies, I thought this is worth a try for my epilepsy, but I'm very skeptical of the anti-cancer effects of the diet. So mainly because I'd heard about the Warburg effect, but I'd also heard about his lab partner, whose name escapes me now, who found that glutamine is also a major fuel for brain tumors, particularly more malignant brain tumors. Lower grade brain tumors tend to be more glycolytic, but the more aggressive you get, the more fuels it can use. So my thinking then was, I'll try and treat the epilepsy, and then I'll have a better quality of life at least. And so very early on, I went on a very strict ketogenic diet, a 4-to-1 ketogenic diet, which is what children with epilepsy go on. So I didn't go at it half-hearted. I went just full pelt. And from that, I did lots of trial and error, because initially the diet just failed miserably for me, and quite spectacularly. I was having worse seizures. And I thought, oh, I can't give up on this. This is just terrible. And so what I did then is I actually purposely overdosed on my medication because I wanted to end it all. That's how bad it got. And then I woke up after a very long unplanned sleep. And I actually became more motivated to do something about it. And interestingly, I had no appetite then, so I just wasn't eating anything. And I found that my seizures were perfectly well controlled. And I thought, what's happening here? And then I noticed as soon as I ate again, even though it was a very ketogenic meal, the seizures came back. So I thought that's very interesting. And then I just read tons and tons of studies on ketogenic diets and epilepsy. And I found that the type of epilepsy I had could be referred to as reflex epilepsy. So it's when, in my case, I identified countless triggers from so many diaries that I'd accumulated on all my triggers, dietary and otherwise. And I'd noticed certain patterns. And then from the research that I did, I noticed that reflex epilepsy can have these triggers that are kind of like allergies. So even if you're on a strict ketogenic diet with all the ketogenic foods, you can have an allergy-like response to certain foods they're all plant foods that can make you have seizures. And so I thought, maybe I need to look into this more. And then I found out about oligoantigenic ketogenic diets. That's what they're called in the literature. So it just means, as I was saying, like this, you have this allergy-like response to certain foods, and I could narrow it down to initially coconut oil, avocados, certain nuts, and dairy to a degree, but not as strongly. But still, it was still a problem. So I cut out all those foods, and I noticed that I was just stuck with eating fatty cuts of meat and eggs, and so that's all I ate. Fatty cuts of meat, eggs, and sparkling water, and that was my diet. And then suddenly it was quite miraculous. I wasn't having any seizures, and I thought, I can try to come off my medication a bit. And so, against the advice of my neurologist, who thought I was mad, and from just my family telling me, no, definitely don't do it, you're still having seizures. Because I was still having seizures, but they were different, and they were less, they weren't grand mal seizures at this point. I was having focal seizures, but they could get quite bad whenever I ate. And so I thought, I've got nothing to lose, I'm going to try this. And then I tried it, and I was still having problems. So I thought, what can I try to help me more? And then I did further investigation, and then I found this frankincense oil. And I thought, I'm going to try this as I lower the medication and see if that has any effect. I did think about cannabis oil, but that was very difficult to get at that point. And later I did actually try cannabis oil, and made my seizures worse again. So I thought, that's interesting. But the frankincense oil I had just on my tongue, and I found it could even reverse the auras I was getting before I was having a seizure. And I thought, this is quite powerful. Maybe it can help me get off my medication and to mitigate some of those symptoms you get when you're coming off. So you get withdrawal seizures if you're on this very high dose of medication for a long time. And so I did that. As I weaned off the medication very, very slowly, I was experiencing withdrawal seizures, but then the frankincense oil would help to overcome that. And then I started taking magnesium, and that had that magnesium glycinate initially. And then also I had this spray that I was taking with magnesium chloride in water. I'd have that on my tongue as well. That was also extremely effective when I was titrating, when I was going down from my anti-epileptic drugs. And over the course of 2 years, I managed to completely get off the medication. And that was just like a eureka moment, and it was just incredible. And then over that time as well,
What year was that? What year was that, Andrew, that you actually managed to get off the meds?
I think it was the year after I met you, so 2016. Yeah. took a long time, but I managed to do it. And so I also had hyperbaric oxygen therapy because I was suffering from fatigue from scar tissue from the operation I had and from the brain hemorrhage. And so I did that along with having exogenous ketones and ketone salts and lots of fasting. So I just threw the kitchen sink at it, did all these things. Had even more of my frankincense oil. And the way that the frankincense oil works is that it contains boswellic acids, and the boswellic acids act on this pro-inflammatory pathway. It's an arachidonic acid pathway. Kind of, it blocks an enzyme involved in that. And then, so yeah, it's anti-inflammatory. I think I've explained it. So I had hyperbaric oxygen therapy after I discovered Dominic D'Agostino's work on rodents with glioblastoma, where it was a combination of restricted ketogenic diet, a 4-to-1. So they're not all ketogenic diets are created equal. The restricted ketogenic diet, it was ketone esters. I did experiment with ketone esters, but at that time, it was just exogenous ketones from ketone salts. I did find them very effective for me. And especially with hyperbaric oxygen therapy, because when you're having that, it stimulates your whole central nervous system. So if you're prone to having seizures, it can cause you to have seizures, which it did for me. So I had to really convince the people operating the chamber that I could continue, because it can be very dangerous if you're having seizures in the chamber, in this enclosed space. And so I did further research into that, and I learned that there was this technique the Marines were using when they were preparing to go to deep depths with their oxygen rebreathers, so that they could go deeper without having seizures, because we all have a seizure threshold, even people who haven't had a blow to the head or an explosion in their brain, which is what I had. Yeah, we all have a seizure threshold, but we can improve that threshold through things like improving our tolerance to oxygen in this fashion, where it's a stress, and where it's oxidative stress, where you have this reactive oxygen species in the brain, which at a low level is not a good thing. But if it's at a therapeutic level with the hyperbaric oxygen therapy at the right level, it can put a lot of stress on these cancer cells, which, by the way, I could actually feel when I was in the chamber. It was a very bizarre experience. I could feel it in that area of my head. And it was, yeah, it was bizarre. So I did, from the research into the Marines, I learned that they use an what they call air brake technique to train the alveoli in the lungs to tolerate deeper pressures with this 100% oxygen that you're breathing in the chamber. So I was in the chamber that I had a mask on, so I could control when I had the oxygen in and when I didn't. And so I used this air brake technique where I was breathing in a very controlled way, which was, I followed the protocol that the Marines use to the letter, with my own biofeedback to think, okay, how is this working? And then viewing it like strength training. You know, you train a muscle and it gets stronger, or you have cold showers and you adapt to it. It's the same thing with the hyperbaric oxygen therapy. You can adapt to these deeper pressures where more of the oxygen is getting to the tissues. And so I did that following the protocol that was used in the rodent model. It's very difficult to even go into chambers that go that deep, but I managed to do it. And I was doing that for six and a half weeks, every day, weekends off. And the weekends I would spend completely fasted. I lost a lot of weight, but after that I had my best scan results, which showed that not only did I not have any enhancement, so no disease at all, but I also had significant improvement in my scarring of the scar tissue that was there, which was causing me to have fatigue and all these horrible problems. One such was I would occasionally lose my speech completely. and I'd have to wait for it to come back. Or I'd struggle to think of words. So I could either not form words, or I couldn't, the connection wasn't there to think of the words. And so having overcome that, I went back to university to study cancer biology because I wanted to get into research, partly because I knew if I was talking about this without any kind of lovely title saying, oh no, look, I'm an academic, people wouldn't really listen to me because there are so many anecdotes on the internet. And so I wanted to get into research and to have a voice. And my story at that time as well was then picked up by New Scientist magazine. And they wanted to feature it as a main story. And so initially they were very skeptical, so they were looking into it. And by this time, I'd also gone to Charing Cross Hospital. So I transitioned my care to Charing Cross because they were interested in ketogenic diets and metabolic therapies and repurposed drugs and these kinds of things. And those are the kinds of things that aligned to what I was most interested in doing. And at this point, I'd evolved in my thinking about ketogenic diets for brain cancer rather than just epilepsy, because I'd thought about it more clearly, and I'd learned that the ketones have beneficial effects on their own. So you don't have to just think about the simplistic view of depriving the cancer cells of glucose. So I realized that not only do the ketone bodies have these signaling effects, which are preferential, you also have an effect of lessening the effects, at least lessening the effect of insulin and associated growth factors, which are involved in just almost everything. And so yeah, those were the two main things that allowed me to stay the course and believe that what I was doing was effective. But then I think having the frankincense was a huge thing as well. And then I added in melatonin. So I was cycling melatonin for 4 to 5 weeks at a time, and then I'd come off it for a while. And I found that to be, I don't know if that was beneficial, but I felt good doing it because I just read a lot about it. And then I guess now we can come to now. Now I'm at this stage where I've had almost 10 years of no sign of disease, and I have learned so many other things. So for the past few years, another thing that I do, which I feel has benefited me and my course of my journey, is not having the contrast agent for my scans, because the more and more research I've done about that, and the work that I've done in looking into how this affects cancer patients, potentially how it affects cancer patients, because there's so many things we still have to call theories when there's so much evidence. But the potential of when this rare earth metal that they inject into millions of patients every day, or every year, I'd say. I don't know if it's every day, but it's a lot. The physiological effects that has is quite concerning once it's retained. So it aggregates in certain regions in the brain, including the dentate nucleus, which is, it's called dentate nucleus because it's kind of like a set of teeth in the brain. That's what it looks like. And it's involved with fine motor control. So I suspect from a lot of the stories I've heard from patients is that many of these patients may be attributing what they think are brain tumor symptoms with gadolinium retention. And we don't know that because it's not something that's really tested for, but when it is, it's a massive problem. And the only hospital that tests for this in the UK is St. Thomas's. And it's usually as an incidental finding. But there's enough evidence to show that not only does it accumulate in certain regions in the brain, but the gadolinium has been found in brain tumor tissue from autopsies, and it's also found in the bone, which causes problems with immunity and a host of other issues. And so, yeah, that's in a nutshell, that's, I guess, everything.
I think it's just such an inspiring story. It reminds me very much of when I got that sick, and then the docs tell you it's not going to be curable, and there's enormous sort of amount of research that you have to do, and it's just so inspiring to show people that you can be your own doc. You know, it's my son's coming in now, so we're going to make a racket just now. I'm talking. We're coming in from school, but yeah, what I've got to get into this though, just before I let Jeremy in to ask a few questions. I'm sure he's got quite a few to ask, but please let us into a little bit of some of the amazing things you've done with diet, because I mean, I used to go and joke with you quite a bit online of how many insects and worms and whatever you were eating, and just the amazing. I mean, I've had dinner with you, and I've seen even in a Brazilian restaurant. You know, you have to be stricter than I did. If some bit of meat comes around with a little bit of Parmesan, yeah, I'll have it. I'll have one bit of chicken, maybe. Mostly it's red meat, but when I'm out, I'll have a little bit of junk. You don't know. It was like, what's that been cooked in? Is there any bit of herb on it? It was quite fascinating to watch. It must be pretty much the strictest carnivore I've ever met. But what was your journey through that to finding carnivore? And what was it with all, you know, buying a lot of your food at pet shops and stuff? That was brilliant. I loved that.
Yeah, so the way that came about is I didn't know carnivore diets existed. I just stumbled into it from going on an exclusion diet and realizing that I didn't have any triggers for my epilepsy with meat and fat. So that's what I based my diet on. Yeah, I didn't know it was a thing at the time.
Sorry to interrupt, but that could be worded differently. That you know, without any plants, you weren't triggered, right? That's essentially what you found out. We talk about going on to meat and fat, but essentially, and I know I forget the doctor's name now that did the GAPS diet. She found that some of the very, very severely autistic children that were not responding. Natasha McBride, right? That's what I'm trying to get out. Yeah. Yeah, she only found out about 2 years ago, so she's a bit later to the party maybe, that when she removed every single plant, that the non-responsive autistic children started to respond. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, other than to that. I think that's quite important, not to just focus on the meat and fat. It's the absence of the plants, which is still shocking, understandably, to so many people with numerous different labeled conditions, from, you know, serious to chronic.
Yeah, I think that's very important. And also the fact that herbs and spices, especially, there are certain ones that are more triggering than others, but with epilepsy, certain herbs, spices, even certain smells can trigger seizures. So you have to be really careful about that. Like eucalyptus oil is a major trigger for me. If I smell that, it sets me off and I have seizures, even now.
That's amazing. So yeah, so how did you come to it, and how did you start with the bugs and stuff? And do you feel that was beneficial? And it was fascinating. It's trying to find the cleanest meat, I think you were at some point, weren't you?
Yeah, and I was doing a lot of research on ancestral diets, and I just thought, because I was interested, I was reading up a lot on Weston A. Price, and I thought I want to try and make my diet as nutritious as possible. So I added organ meats, and I got into the insects because I thought, well, we largely evolved eating insects, and many populations still have the chitinase enzyme to properly eat them without causing problems. I didn't know if I had that or not, but I seem to do okay with them. I know some people, it's kind of like if you have an allergy to shellfish, it's probably not a good idea to eat certain insects, but primarily to get into it, I started eating crickets. And then I got to the stage where I thought that's not really ketogenic enough. And also there could be problems with having commercially available insect products because you don't know how they've been fed or how they've been bred. So I went to get some from a breeder that was supplying to pet food, pet shops for geckos mainly. And these were waxworms. So these are very fatty insects that can actually eat plastic. So you have to get them away from plastic. And unless you want to save the world, you know, get them all in the ocean. It takes them a long time to eat the plastic, but the
that's for Greta, the Doom Goblin then. Marvelous.
Well, I don't think she'd like those because there's no benefit to the whole agenda with all that stuff, because you can't really, you can't mass produce them in the way that you can with crickets and other insects, and they need to be kept at a very set temperature. You can't really change the temperature. So I had eventually I got this adapted fish tank that had a thermometer in it, and I had a bed of organic oats and honey, which I couldn't eat obviously, but the waxworms could produce. they could turn that into something that I could eat. So the fatty acids that I could eat, and I just started eating very ketogenic insects. And one benefit of the types of animal fiber that are in certain insects is they can actually chelate heavy metals. So it could have benefited me from when I was initially having these scans with gadolinium, but we don't know. I also had some chelation treatment from having had amalgam fillings removed, which before I had those removed, I'd get a battery-like taste in my mouth, and then I'd have a seizure. And I didn't put two and two together until I thought, metallic taste, and I've got these fillings. I should probably have those removed. So yeah, I had this whole process of having them removed, where I had a treatment beforehand, during, where there was this deionization lamp thing behind me, and the dentist had what looked like kind of a hazmat suit on. So I was thinking, oh, this is pretty dangerous. But that's another thing just that can cause these seizures to be uncontrolled. So it was good to get those out and just to be mindful of.
Jeremy's very hot on that with people getting these amalgams out.
I was just, I'm just loving listening to the story, but I was waiting to get to the bit to say, have you considered, as far as I look at things, what caused, and it's normally plural, the condition in the first place rather than the remedy? Because in my experience, dentistry is usually in there, as in fact, a very good chap I worked with, he had surgery. He was a dentist, so he was clearly exposed to mercury, and also fluoride was a big thing in there. But fundamentally, and I don't know how you'll respond to this, but I'm sure you must have considered it, even though we dealt with the fluoride and we dealt with the mercury and fasting for sure, to the win, right? He did a lot of fasting, and his scar tissue was reduced by 95% from the surgery. And he would tell you, I'm sharing the story with you, but ultimately he believes that, of course, you have to have those things perhaps sitting there, but what he really believes brought it on was he was doing experimental orthodontics, which were within the realms of legal, but he was terrified that it would go wrong and a client would report him and he would end up in trouble. And so, like many fears, real or imagined, it was literally, and I use these terms on purpose, doing his head in. And he remembers when he came out, because his symptoms were sudden, the next thing he woke up with a diagnosis, he suddenly just lost the speech and clap. He remembers the relief. It's strange to say it to people that might be listening, but in his case, and I hear it frequently with others, the relief that he's now got a get out of jail free card with cancer. Like, even if they're going to prosecute him now, not that anyone ever was, they wouldn't come after someone with cancer. He realized, he did a lot of work with Mighty, who Mighty Goodson, to release some really deep fears. And that's why he now believes he's completely healed the causes of what set up the perfect storm for his brain tumor. So I wonder what your thoughts on the true causes, whether it be considered woo or otherwise, Andrew.
Yeah, well, I have thought about this a lot, and there are a number of theories as to how my brain tumor developed. The strongest one is that initially it was a cavernous hemangioma that underwent malignant transformation over a number of years, which is an extremely rare thing, but it can happen. And when it does happen, these kinds of tumors are pretty aggressive because you have a readily available supply of all these blood vessels that are supplying nutrients to the tumor. And so from that, I did more research, and more recently there was a paper that came out that showed that if you've had a specific type of brain injury, or also chronic stress, it can trigger a cascade by which a brain tumor can develop. And I believe that it's not one factor, but it's possibly many with me, whereby I did have quite a few traumatic events that happened to me, and I was under a huge amount of stress, and I had problems with, even though I was eating what I thought was a healthy diet, I had problems with binge eating on healthy foods, and clinical depression, and wasn't sleeping well. So you have that disruption of the circadian rhythm as well. Too much exposure to blue light. And I think those are the main factors in my case that caused it.
What was your initial, when you say the train, was that the underground tube?
Thankfully, no. It was an overground train.
Okay. I'm still thinking what an EMF nightmare in these tubes, metal tubes with everyone's phones kicking off, and whether that was a contributory factor. Yeah, I forgot to mention with the dentist that he also had his, surgical lights directly on the area where he developed his, so you talk about blue light, and I think people hear it and then they just almost filter it out because they just think of blue light, let's get the red blocking glasses, blue blocking glasses, but its significance is huge.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting because I've had so many people talk about me from that time, retrospectively, thinking, did he have a mobile phone attached to that area? And for a start, I'm right-handed, and actually at that time I didn't have a smartphone. I just had a really old kind of phone that I barely used. And also I didn't really use technology that much at that time. So I guess that theory doesn't really, the kind of brain tumor that's most associated with mobile phones anyways, an acoustic neuroma, has the strongest association, though I do think it can be a strong contributory factor for all these other brain tumors. But for me, the light was coming from working, doing shift work in gyms, and constantly having this very bright light. And I would get migraines from that. It's not normal. And chronically over-exercising. So yeah, I was addicted to exercise at that point.
So what do you, where are you now? Are you just, I mean, when I was sitting there, it just seemed completely healthy, you know, very fit young man. And what are you eating now? And are you still doing bugs and stuff, or where have you come to with your diet? Where have you settled on now?
My diet's very simple at the moment. I can actually eat certain plants now. So I can have olives, I can have mushrooms, which it's debatable what a mushroom is, but I can have mushrooms and I can have olives. But my diet's pretty basic now. I mostly just eat lamb hearts and eggs, fatty lamb heart and egg. That's it, really.
Do you eat the whites?
I do, yeah. But I have a mix of having them raw and having them poached or boiled.
Yeah, it's
I
interesting.
try not to overcook. But I do know this anti-nutrient thing with having the egg whites.
I know sometimes, very rarely.
I'm not sure about it.
I crave them and I have to have a load of scrambled eggs, but I just like sort of 6 eggs and I'll throw away 3 whites. But normally if I have eggs, it's only the yolks. But it just now and again, there's something in them. But if I have them when it doesn't really get my joints anymore, but it gets, I just get some heartburn or something if I eat eggs when I don't really crave them. It's weird. Your body kind of tells you. Have you found that?
Yeah. And when I do a more 4-to-1 ketogenic diet, I eat mostly egg yolks. Because I don't like to add fat. I like to have the fat that's naturally on the animal. So I pick very fatty cuts.
Andrew, I'd like to ask you, I mean, what is it, 10 years?
Coming up to 10 years, very close.
Come 10 years, amazing. A couple of questions. One, what did the medical community you were working with, how did they respond as you didn't die initially, which is what they would have expected? And were they, interested or scornful or rejectful or whatever? And two, how has it changed you? Because one would imagine, you're not the same Andrew as you were pre-migraine or pre-diagnosis.
Yeah, well, my oncologist I was seeing initially was very unsupportive and telling me that ketogenic diets were dangerous and what I was going to do wasn't going to help me in any way. And he didn't really seem very impressed with how I was doing. But at that time, yeah, I didn't really care what he what he thought too much. And I'd chosen to move to Charing Cross Hospital, where they've been nothing but supportive and very positive, to the point where I often have to calm down my oncologist. And I choose when I have scans now, and I even view them myself because I have the ability to do that, and it takes a lot less time. But yeah, I'm currently in Oxford, about to move back to London, which is a shame because where I live now is just free of pollutants and problems. And I'm choosing to go back to further my career just in doing my own brain cancer metabolism study. But yeah, the responses I've had from my oncologist that I've been seeing at Charing Cross Hospital, who's also a neurosurgeon, by the way. Neurosurgeons seem to be a lot more open-minded about these things. and a lot more sensible. He's been very excited about everything I've done and thinks it's just fantastic. He gets very enthusiastic about it all. I think partly because Charing Cross Hospital is a centre with Imperial College London's Division of Brain Sciences, and they focus their research efforts on metabolic therapies and ketogenic diets. So it's the perfect, that's why I went to them. They're just very supportive. And he has told me that when patients fast before surgery, the tumors are easier to take out because they become less angiogenic. And so the margins are more clearly defined, they're more circumscribed, so you can pick them out easier, get more out. So yeah, it's always interesting talking to him. He's an interesting character.
That's wonderful to hear. Rare in my experience of talking with people. So it's really wonderful to hear. Do they define a ketogenic diet as perhaps we would, or are they include? I imagine from what I see that they still include seed oils and things within ketogenic diet.
Yeah, I think it's changing, because over the course of the years since 2015, I've been in discussions with 2 major brain tumor charities about ketogenic diet trials, because they wanted to get me involved because I had an interesting case and I was very knowledgeable. And so I was helping to design how these trials are implemented, and also the inclusion criteria. And so it was extremely frustrating, because although there was a lot of progress made, there's only really been one true ketogenic diet trial, which I'm pretty happy with. I think it was actually quite a well-designed trial at the Walton, I think it's called the Keating trial. And that's going on to another stage because they've had interesting results, where they had they had 2 different ketogenic diets that they were trialing. So one was one was an MCT ketogenic diet, so medium chain triglyceride ketogenic diet, and the other was modified Atkins ketogenic diet. And so that's better than what we've seen before, because they were very careful to check blood ketones and blood glucose, and they were encouraged to weigh their food. Obviously, you can't see what people are doing, but it was a better designed trial. But when I've been in discussions about these trials since 2015, it's just been very frustrating, because I introduce things like carnivore diets and saying that the diets need to be personalized and you need to have fewer carbs than they like to have. And we also have this issue at the moment where there's a strong push for plant-based ketogenic diets. And it's really causing so many problems. And when people have problems, rather than trying to reduce the plants, it's thinking, what other plants can we include to overcome this problem? And it's just incredibly frustrating. And so that's one of the main reasons why I'm doing this cancer metabolism study, and also why it's self-funded. So I'm funding it myself because I've had so much frustration with these cancer charities and all of the delays and just all of the navel gazing, really, and the red tape. It's very difficult.
Yeah, I've heard Zofia Clements go on about this from Paleomedicina, that a lot of these ketogenic trials, they're just using all the wrong things, and they're not taking into account all the plant toxins and whatever. So it's this reductionist thinking, isn't it, in medicine, really, that it's one thing. We've got to look into ketosis, and I think there's so much more to it than that, really.
Absolutely. Even if you look at the first ketogenic diet trials for epilepsy, they're using a product called KetoCal. And just, again, a really ridiculous, frustrating thing is that if you have any licensed medicinal product for in any kind of shake or as a food preparation, it has to include these hydrogenated oils and these synthetic ingredients, which are just horrible. and things like soy, and it's just going to mess you up even more. So they use products called KetoCal, which I'm surprised they had any positive results with, but in the rodents they seem to respond better to. I don't know if that's because they're naturally calorie restricted or if it's the ketones or what, because you do get an effect even from not eating as often. So sometimes it's not just about, well, often it's not just about what you eat, it's how often you eat, when you eat, and how much.
Yeah, definitely. I found that with autoimmunity as well. It was fascinating to me. I've only had one personal brush with oncology when my mum was going there for breast cancer, and it was a surgical oncologist, so he's quite a cool guy, but and he thought I was an idiot, but he would talk and have a laugh, and then he was astonished in the end, when we did get that tumor to reverse. But I pointed out to him one day all those sort of crisp and chocolate machines all along the corridor, and he said, I never thought about that. And then I said, well, is there anything, in diet that you ever say to people? Is there any advice that you would give to somebody? And he said, oh, yes, no dairy, just go on to soy milk and stuff. I absolutely burst out laughing. I told him, there is no, if this is a hormonally driven breast tumor, there's nothing that messes about the hormones more than soy. And he went, oh, really? And it was so strange. There's just nothing in there, is there, in the training?
No. It is very frustrating, but there's hope in that there are these centers now where they are open to these metabolic therapies, but they are few and far between.
I'd like to ask my question again. How have you changed from Andrew knowing there was a problem to today?
Well, I actually think I'm a lot calmer, and funnily enough, I don't have clinical depression anymore, I wouldn't say. And I feel a lot healthier, generally speaking, which is kind of odd as well because of everything I've been through. But I have blood tests for a huge ton of different metabolic markers and just various health markers, and they're always good. So yeah, it's
my wife when I met her she'd suffered the full horrors of modern oncology and was still terminally ill diagnosis, and that's 12 years now. She's doing well, and she said, cancer saved her life because the fear of dying was strong enough for her to change so many things in her life, and she'd already changed and learned a lot. And I think a large part of why she got well, because she's from Trinidad originally, is we moved, and she was in Canada. We moved to the Caribbean, and she was in the sea and in the sun every day. And I really think that was a large part to do with it. But anyone that's ever been diagnosed with the big C, whatever that is, after and survived, let alone thrived, and Natalie is thriving, they never fully get free of it, because one of the things I discussed with people is, when will you stop testing? Because there's and this is, hopefully this will lead to my question, is Natalie knows she's well. People go, how do you know you're well? She says, I know I'm well. And she had to have a scan some years ago for insurance claims, and it confirmed there was no cancer, but there will still be a twinge every now and again. And the dentist I was talking about, he'll get a twinge, and you can't help that. Is that, you must get those. And what do you do with that? Oh my God, is it, am I going backwards? Is this it again? You must have those, do you? And how do you deal with that? And will you ever stop testing?
Well, no, I don't think I ever will stop testing, because I have this kind of competition with myself to get rid of all of the scar tissue. I don't know if it's possible. I've been told it'd be impossible, but nothing's impossible really, is it? Or, well, a lot of things are, but with the brain, there's a lot we don't understand. So also, I do think there's not much of a problem with me having the scans, because I have them so infrequently. I only have them every 16 months, and it's by my choice, and I don't have the contrast, and it's not a CT scan, it's MRI. So it's debatable whether that can be problematic or not, because I don't know. It depends what you think about about those scans and electromagnetic radiation. But yeah, it's an interesting question, because I guess it's kind of like the COVID question. COVID's there because we're testing. We stopped testing, it's not there. But yeah, that's controversial. But yeah, just what was the other question about the testing?
I mean, you must get twinges or feelings or pressure or whatever from time to time, and like Natalie and the other chap was doing, your mind immediately, and Natalie's trained herself to go, no, something's just moving or whatever, and it passes. So I wondered if you have the same things, a little twinge, a little pressure, maybe even a headache, probably not, and how you deal with the fear that must come up.
Yeah, well, it's usually, if I do experience those symptoms, it's related to certain stimuli around me that I can identify. So it's not anything spontaneous. I think if I were to have any kind of spontaneous symptom that's unusual, then I would worry about it, but it hasn't happened in a number of years. So yeah, it's I don't really worry about that too much, which is a good thing.
I've kind of given up any testing or anything, but I do understand why you do it, because you're so focused on the research, right? I mean, this is all good data and whatever for you, and I understand that you're involved in that now. But one thing I'd like to ask, which is a thing I'd really like to ask, because like Jeremy has always said, it's very difficult to talk about cancer. If you haven't got it, or if you make any sort of claims that somebody might have reversed it with any of your interventions, and you have
especially as someone who's involved in research, because I feel like, I need to be careful about what I say, or I need to use certain words. I need to say, it's speculative, we can't prove anything, which I think to a certain degree is responsible and correct, but it gets to a level sometimes where you're maybe afraid to say things which are actually fact and true. It's a very difficult thing.
I think that we can talk very openly about things like autoimmunity and whatever. People don't seem to care about that, but sometimes I've been sort of pulled into a thread, like somebody has some hideous tumor somewhere, or particularly thinking of a guy who had bone cancer everywhere, and somebody said, oh, have a word with Phil, and I thought, oh dear, and so I just put something up, a little something, and then all of his friends and relatives attacked, and Jeremy said, that was before I met Jeremy, and Jeremy has said to me, just don't talk about it, keep this stuff in the background. And it is difficult to talk about. It's like even that video of my mum's, it's got like 3,000 views or something, and another little clip that was boring from the same talk has got like 300,000 views, and it gets pushed down, and you end up sort of face down in swimming pools and things when you claim to have helped anybody to do this. But and so there is a huge fear about it. There's also the pharmaceutical companies have their big cash cow on cancer and whatever. So as somebody who I believe is qualified eminently to talk about this, what would you say? Because I know what I say to arthritics. I just go, oh, shove all the meds in the bin and get on a carnivore diet and you'll be fine, you know, sort the light out. I can say that though to them. But what would you say to somebody? I'm particularly thinking of one person who approached me recently who I told about you and said, go look at his stuff, go look up interviews. Looking forward to sending them this one, just been diagnosed with a glioblastoma or whatever. What would you say to somebody when they're faced with that huge fear? You know, that's it, it's incurable and it's terminal. Where do you go from there?
Well, they could do what I did and just read cancer as a metabolic disease, or Tripping Over the Truth, which is a much easier to digest book. It's not this big textbook, it's easier to read. And then, yeah, it's difficult because you have so many different ketogenic diets, but there's a good book, Fight Cancer with a Ketogenic Diet. I'm actually in that book, so I'm not biased. It's just I wasn't paid to contribute to it. I did it because I think it's a good book and it's well written and it's very easy to read. What else? Now, after I talk with you, I'll probably have loads of resources, but just thinking about other things that are not food related, like the gadolinium. No one's talking about that, but I didn't realize there's a massive community of people who, when I interviewed Dr. Brent Wagner, he pronounces it because he's American, but I pronounce it Wagner because I grew up in Germany. But yeah, Dr. Brent Wagner, he when I interviewed on him, I've interviewed him twice on my podcast, and then I didn't realize afterwards that I would get this deluge of responses from people who'd been affected by gadolinium deposition disease, it's called, or nephrogenic systemic fibrosis, which is another condition from gadolinium retention. There's also another one, gadolinium storage disease. Thank you. And so, yeah, so that's a huge issue that no one's talking about, which isn't diet related, but diet could probably make it worse. There's Catriona Walsh, I don't know if you know about her. She had a brain tumor and she's been talking about this issue with the gadolinium, and she has some interesting work that she's done looking at how having oxalates in the diet can worsen gadolinium toxicity. So, and make you more likely to retain it. So that's very interesting because it binds to the oxalates. So yeah, that's a worrying thing.
Where do you hope to get to, Andrew, with both personally and your work? Because, you know, I understand, you know, it's you're treading a fine line in the system of trying to set up studies and get, you know, probably more conclusive evidence to be able to make certain statements or what have you. So what are your, you know, my hopes are that these, you know, I think protectionary laws or alleged laws to protect an industry are removed, so that we create an environment where so-called citizen scientists, that would be perhaps you in the beginning, all the way up to, you know, a seasoned professional, can appear at the same conferences and talk on the same forums with the only interest of exploring what's going on and what's the way forward. But what are your hopes personally and professionally?
Well, the main thing is this study I'm doing now, which I think will be, or I will be doing by the end of the year, which I believe will be a landmark study establishing a metabolic phenotype of glioblastoma. That's our aim. That's my main goal at the moment. And then I'm also writing a book about gadolinium, which I have been for the past couple of years, but it's been kind of slow. I didn't know it'd be that hard to write, but new information keeps coming up, and it's actually really interesting just how it's in our water supply and in a whole bunch of areas that we didn't think it would be. And so
I didn't know that.
You could argue that everyone should have it as part of a heavy metals test. So that's one of my goals. Another is to keep poking the bee's nest, which is what I've been doing. I go to, as you said, I go to all these conferences, but they're not these alternative health conferences where it's like an echo chamber and you're not really going to make any impact. The real impact you make is to get yourself involved in these more, I don't know if the mainstream is the right word, but just the traditional oncology conferences and with all these stuffy professors and doctors and misters and misses, because surgeons do all that work and then become a Mr. or a Ms. again. So getting more close with those people and then establishing those connections and then gradually changing the system, because they are becoming more open to these things, but it's just about pushing it further and continuing to have those occasional moments where you poke the bee's nest and try and disrupt it all. And I've done that with other things as well, not just with health. I was working with the NHS over the past year, and I recently left because it was just frustrating, and I also wanted to, it was always a short thing until I could do this kind of research again. But when I was doing that, I was pushing against this other problem we have with, I don't like to say the word woke, but this whole narrative of being inclusive, inclusivity, and yeah, diversity and inclusion, which I kind of rallied against with purely objectively, and I managed to get in a newspaper and caused a lot of fuss, but managed to have an impact, which was another example of staying quiet for a while you accumulate all of your evidence, and then after you've sat back for a while and people are just causing all this mayhem, you very quietly and carefully cause a bit of a fuss. And yeah, I could have gone a lot further with that, but I decided not to, because I realized if I go further, it could have disrupted what I'm doing with my research. So I like to cause a bit of a fuss and then have it not be too much that it causes too much of an issue, and then stay quiet for a while, and then, yeah, poke the bee's nest once more.
I think that's really wise, and I think I could really learn off you in that respect. I poke the bee's nest way too much.
Not an easy thing to do.
No, it isn't. But listen, Andrew, I think we've taken up enough of your time. It's a great place to leave it. But thank you so much. And I think you're an incredible inspiration. And I think, as Jeremy said, you know, there's something about people who've healed. You know, I had dinner with you, and there is a real aura of calm around you. And there's something about going through one of those journeys that makes you realize what's actually important in life and what isn't.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that really comes away with you. You know, it comes across strongly with you. And you're a great inspiration. And I hope people with these sort of horrific diagnoses that clearly are not set in stone will listen to this, and I'm really looking forward to just sending this to all sorts of people. And thank you so much. And before you go, is there any place you'd like to point anybody where your work is going on or anything?
Well, I can plug the website for my study if anyone would like to help fund it. We are getting involved with a number of organizations who are going to provide a lot of the funding, so it doesn't have to all come from people, but it does help to get as much as we need. So the website is beatingbraincancer.co.uk, and yeah, it's a cancer metabolism study where we will be taking numerous blood tests from newly diagnosed glioblastoma patients, and then some of them will be doing certain interventions, others won't. And then over the course of 6 months to a year, probably be about a year, maybe a bit longer actually, this cohort of patients will have had a series of blood tests with a host of different, a battery of different tests for metabolic markers that we've identified that would be interesting to look at, and which we could then expand upon further. And I really believe this would be a landmark study that could be built upon by anyone who's then going on to look at metabolic interventions that could be applied to these brain cancer patients in the future.
That's brilliant, Andrew. Just great luck with it, and go on, throw Andrew a ton of money, because this is fantastic.
Well, I'd also like to throw a dentist onto his study, and while he's doing all that wonderful work, get every single one of them to open their mouth and check their dental history and whether they've had amalgam removal as well. So I think that would be very interesting. But absolutely, just an honor to meet you, very humbled. Thank God people like you exist and are speaking out, and let's make many more of them.
Brilliant. Okay, Andrew, thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, it was fun. I enjoyed it.
Great.
Thanks, Andrew.
Son of a lighthouse keeper, through cons and a wishing well.